In a chapel adorned with centuries-old paintings and the gentle glow of amber candlelight, two religious leaders stood facing each other across a wooden table. Between them, an open Bible and a single flame. It was May 18, 2026. And in that room, the head of the Catholic Church would speak 9 words that would ripple across the Mediterranean and beyond within hours. Words that were not diplomatic. Words that were not calculated. Words that came from somewhere deeper. He said, "I pray daily for Lebanon." 9 words. But those words would shape conversations in newsrooms, churches, and government offices from Tokyo to Toronto. And they would raise a question that haunts the Vatican today: can prayer change geopolitics? Can one man's conviction move nations? Can spiritual authority matter in a world run by military force? If you want to understand why the Pope of the Catholic Church lies awake at night thinking about a small Mediterranean nation, and why the next 45 days could determine whether an entire civilization disappears, stay with me. Most countries die slowly. They fade. Their currencies weaken. Their youth migrate. Their institutions corrode. Lebanon didn't fade. Lebanon shattered. Think about what happened in the span of just 7 years. In 2019, the Lebanese pound crashed. Not declined. Crashed. A currency that once traded at 1,500 to the American dollar fell to over 90,000. That's not economics. That's a civilization experiencing a seizure. Banks locked their doors. Families discovered that accounts containing life savings, hundreds of thousands of dollars accumulated over decades, had evaporated. People who were middle class on Tuesday became poor on Wednesday. There was no warning. There was no transition. There was only loss. The poverty rate skyrocketed to over 80%. In a country that had been called the Paris of the Middle East. A place known for its education, its banking expertise, its cosmopolitan sensibility. A country where more people could read than in most of the Arab world. That country became unrecognizable. But economic collapse, as devastating as it is, was only the beginning. On August 4, 2020, something happened at the port of Beirut that would scar the nation permanently. For 6 years, 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate had sat in a warehouse. No one secured it. No one moved it. No one checked it. It was simply there, in a storage facility in the middle of a major city, slowly deteriorating in the heat and humidity. Then it detonated. The explosion was so powerful that it was visible from space. The blast crater could be seen from satellites. More than 200 people died instantly. 6,000 were wounded. 300,000 were left homeless. Neighborhoods that had stood for generations were reduced to rubble in seconds. And not a single person responsible faced justice. Not one official. Not one politician. Not one person in the chain of command that allowed 2,700 tons of explosives to sit unguarded in an urban center. They all walked free. When a government cannot punish its own failure, when citizens watch their city burn and see no accountability, something dies inside a nation. Trust dies. Hope dies. The social contract that binds citizens to their state shatters beyond repair. Lebanon had already lost much. But after the port explosion, it lost something even more fundamental, the belief that things could be fixed. Then came October 2023. When Israel responded to the October 7 attacks, Hezbollah, the Shia military organization and political force that dominates southern Lebanon, began exchanging fire with Israeli forces across the border. These were not theoretical skirmishes. These were not isolated incidents. This was the beginning of an armed conflict that would transform the entire southern part of the country into a war zone. By late 2024, Israel launched a comprehensive military campaign. The goal: eliminate Hezbollah's military capabilities. The result: the displacement of over 1 million Lebanese civilians. More than 20% of the entire national population. Entire villages in the south were reduced to ash by airstrikes. Villages that had existed for centuries. Families that had roots in that soil for 1,000 years. All of it, gone. A ceasefire was arranged in April 2026. The United States brokered it. Israeli and Lebanese negotiators discussed terms. An agreement was reached, a 10-day truce. Then it was extended to 3 weeks. Then, on May 15, it was extended again, another 45 days. But a ceasefire is not peace. A ceasefire is a pause. And everyone knows it. Israeli military units remain positioned in southern Lebanon. Israel's defense ministry has stated openly that their forces will maintain control of a security zone extending to the Litani River, 25 kilometers into Lebanese territory, until Hezbollah is neutralized. That could mean months. That could mean years. Within that zone, civilians who fled during the bombing have not been allowed to return. Their homes stand empty. Some are occupied by Israeli soldiers. Their olive groves and citrus orchards, land that fed their families for generations, now sit untended, withering. Hezbollah, weakened but not destroyed, is reportedly reconstructing its military infrastructure in areas outside the occupation zone. Intelligence suggests they have re-established command structures in the Bekaa Valley. New weapons shipments have reportedly arrived through Syria. The ceasefire forbids this. No one is enforcing the prohibition. The Lebanese government, caught between two armed forces it does not control, negotiates from a position of such profound weakness that the word negotiation barely applies. They are not bargaining. They are begging. And through all of this, the economic catastrophe, the explosion no one was punished for, the war, the displacement, the military occupation, one community has borne a particular burden. One faith has faced a particular darkness. The Christians of Lebanon are vanishing. When Lebanon became independent in 1943, Christians formed the majority. Between 55 and 60% of the population. Predominantly Maronite Catholics, but also Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholics, Armenians, Syriacs, and others. The political system was built around this demographic reality. The presidency, reserved for a Maronite Christian. The Prime Minister's office, designated for a Sunni Muslim. The parliamentary speaker, allocated to a Shia Muslim. It was a balance. An arrangement. A compromise that worked because the underlying numbers supported it. Those numbers have changed. Decades of emigration transformed the country's religious composition. The civil war from 1975 to 1990 drove people away. Economic stagnation pushed them out. Political paralysis convinced them that staying was futile. And the simple human desire, the almost universal desire, for a better life created an exodus. Today, Christians represent somewhere between 30 and 35% of Lebanon's population. The Maronite community, once the dominant political force, is shrinking. Their young people leave. Their schools have fewer students. Their parishes have fewer worshippers. Their political influence diminishes every year. No one knows the exact numbers. Lebanon has not conducted a national census since 1932. 94 years ago. Every religious faction refuses to count, because each one fears what the numbers would reveal about their own demographic decline. The economic crisis accelerated everything. In 2025 alone, more than 220,000 people left Lebanon. That's one person out of every 23 residents. Since 2019, cumulative emigration has surpassed 500,000 people. In a country of 5 million, that is a catastrophic loss. Christians leave at higher rates than other communities. They tend to be better educated. They have more professional skills. They have family networks in Canada, France, Germany, Australia, the United States. They have pathways out. A Maronite bishop spoke to a journalist in March 2026. He said something that haunts everyone who works in Lebanese Christianity: we are not losing members. We are losing a civilization. Every family that departs carries 15 centuries of continuous Christian presence away with them. And they are not coming back. 15 centuries. That is how long Christians have lived on this land. That is how long Jesus' message has been preached in the mountains and valleys of what is now Lebanon. And in one generation, that presence could become historical. Something studied in books rather than lived. This is what brought the Pope to Beirut 6 months earlier. On November 30, 2025, an elderly man in white robes descended the stairs of an airplane and stepped onto Lebanese soil. Pope Leo XIV had just become Pope in May of that year. His first journey abroad as leader of the Catholic Church could have taken him anywhere on earth. To Latin America, where he spent much of his priesthood. To the United States, where he was born. To Africa, where Christianity is growing fastest. He chose Lebanon. This was not a casual decision. This was not a whim. The Holy See does not make decisions like this without strategic intention. The Pope's visit to Lebanon was a statement. It was a choice to place one small, wounded nation at the center of papal attention. The motorcade drove through Beirut's streets. Thousands lined the roads. People waved Lebanese flags. Some held Vatican banners. Many were crying. An elderly woman in black held a photograph above her head, her son, killed in the port explosion. Reuters published the image. It needed no caption. At the presidential palace in Babda, he met Joseph Aoun, the new Maronite president. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. They discussed sovereignty. The dignity of Lebanese institutions. The obligation of the international community to respect territorial integrity. Behind closed doors, a source reported the Pope was blunt: the world watches Lebanon with pity. I did not come with pity. I came with anger. Anger that the international community permitted this. Anger that those responsible have not been held accountable. On his second day, he traveled north into the mountains. Past villages clinging to hillsides. Past terraced olive groves and ancient stone churches. He went to Anaya, to the monastery of Saint Maron. There, he knelt at the tomb of Saint Charbel Mochlauf, the most revered Maronite saint. A 19th-century hermit monk who spent the final 23 years of his life in complete solitude. His tomb has become one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the entire Middle East. Christians and Muslims both come. The Pope knelt there and prayed in silence. For 7 minutes. Not the typical 20-second papal moment. But 7 full minutes. Long enough that photographers shifted uncomfortably. Long enough that Vatican officials consulted watches. Long enough that something profound seemed to be happening. When he rose, his eyes were red. Whether from tears or simply from the intensity of the silence, no one could say. But everyone could see that something had moved in him. That image, the Pope rising from his knees, his face raw and open, appeared on the front page of every Lebanese newspaper the next morning. It was printed on prayer cards. It was distributed to Maronite parishes across the country. It became iconic. That afternoon, he stood in Martyrs Square in downtown Beirut. A plaza where 1 million people had gathered in 2005 to demand the withdrawal of Syrian troops. A plaza that has been the stage for every significant moment in Lebanon's recent history. Now, 40,000 people gathered here again. Christians and Muslims standing shoulder to shoulder. Sunni and Shia. Maronite and Druze. The Pope addressed the crowd. Lebanon is more than a country, he said. It is a proof that people of different faiths can coexist with dignity. If that proof fails, the world will suffer consequences far beyond these borders. That evening, he traveled to Kirk, the seat of the Maronite Patriarch. A grand stone structure perched on a hill overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. In a courtyard illuminated by thousands of candles, thousands of young Lebanese Christians gathered. Students, young professionals, seminarians, young parents with their children. This was the moment that mattered most to him. Not the meetings with politicians. Not the ecumenical gathering with its carefully choreographed interfaith symbolism. But this, the young people. Because the young people are leaving. They look at Lebanon and see no jobs, no electricity, no stable government, no future. They are the ones who, if they go, will carry away the last breathing connection to Lebanese Christianity. He looked at them and said, "Do not abandon this land. This land has not abandoned you." The words were simple. Everyone understood they were not enough. You cannot eat words. You cannot pay rent with encouragement. You cannot rebuild a broken economy with a papal blessing. But the young people wept. Because someone had come. Because someone with the weight of 1 billion Catholics behind him had traveled 6,000 kilometers to stand on a hill in Lebanon and look them in the eyes and say, "I see you. You have not been forgotten. You are not alone." One young woman, 26 years old, an architect who had been unable to find work in Lebanon for 3 years, spoke to a journalist afterward. She had a visa application sitting on her desk for Montreal. She said, "He told us not to give up. I love him for saying it. But I cannot eat love. I cannot pay my electricity bill with hope." Yet she wept. They all wept. Because in a country where being forgotten is the deepest wound, deeper than poverty, deeper than war, deeper than explosions, being seen, even for a moment, was enough to break them open. On his final day, December 2nd, the Pope celebrated Mass on the Beirut waterfront. 150,000 people attended. The largest public gathering in Lebanon since the failed revolution of 2019. They came from everywhere. From the mountains. From the Bekaa Valley. From the south, where villages still smoldered from airstrikes. From Tripoli in the north. They walked for hours. They came on buses. They came in cars. Before the Mass, the Pope visited the port. He stood at the edge of the crater, the massive, empty wound where Warehouse 12 had stood. Where 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate had turned fire and dust and human bodies into a scar on the earth. He said nothing. He simply stood there. Hands folded. Head bowed. For 3 minutes. A journalist who was standing nearby said, "I have covered every major event in this country for 20 years. The wars. The assassinations. The explosion itself. I have never witnessed silence like that. It was not a ceremony. It was not a politician performing grief. It was a man standing at a grave. A grave that an entire city shares. 6 months have passed. The Pope returned to Rome. The ceasefire holds, barely. The negotiations continue, slowly. The Christians of Lebanon pray, desperately. But the situation has not improved. It has deteriorated in ways that even pessimistic observers did not foresee. The ceasefire brokered in April is fragile. Israeli forces occupy southern Lebanon. Within that occupation zone, villages remain empty. Homes stand abandoned. Orchards wither. Civilians have not been permitted to return. Outside the zone, Hezbollah rebuilds. Intelligence agencies confirm that the organization has re-established command structures. New weapons have arrived from Syria. The ceasefire prohibits this. No enforcement mechanism exists. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, continues to patrol. They have been doing this since 1978. They continue to report violations. And they continue to be ignored by all parties. The Washington negotiations proceed toward their 4th round of talks, scheduled for June 2nd and 3rd. But the fundamental issues remain. Israel demands complete Hezbollah disarmament as a condition for withdrawal. Hezbollah refuses to disarm while Israeli soldiers occupy Lebanese soil. The Lebanese government, weak beyond measure, negotiates from a position barely distinguishable from helplessness. The economy continues to spiral downward. Remittances from Lebanese abroad represent approximately 30% of the nation's GDP. This makes Lebanon one of the most remittance-dependent economies in the world. Families survive because relatives send money from Montreal, Paris, Sydney, Dubai. But the banking system remains broken. Money that flows in flows out again, consumed immediately by basic survival. No investment. No recovery. No future. And the Christians continue to leave. Every month, another family decides. Another passport application is filed. Another house is sold. Another pew sits empty on Sunday morning. On May 18, AramI arrived at the Vatican. The Catholicos of the Armenian Apostolic Church. His community in Lebanon has been directly affected by the crisis. His seminary has seen enrollment collapse. His faithful have emigrated in such numbers that the Armenian Christian presence in Lebanon is threatened with extinction. He sat across from the Pope in the Urban 8 chapel. Between them, an open Bible and a lit candle. AramI spoke with the voice of a man not merely observing a crisis, but living inside it. He discussed Lebanese sovereignty, Israel's military occupation, the violation of territorial integrity, the need for the international community to enforce the ceasefire, the urgency of deploying the Lebanese army in the south, the necessity of holding all parties, including Hezbollah, accountable. He spoke about Christian communities. Not just the Armenians. All of them. The Maronites. The Greek Orthodox. The Greek Catholics. The Syriac Catholics. The Chaldeans. All struggling under weight that seems to increase every day. All threatened with erasure after 15 centuries of unbroken presence. The Pope listened. He took notes in his small black notebook, the same notebook he has carried since the conclave that elected him. When AramI finished, Leo XIV responded with words described as some of the most personal and emotionally unfiltered he has spoken since taking office. Lebanon is not a foreign policy issue for me, he said, his voice low but steady. Lebanon is a wound. I carry it every day. I carried it in Beirut when I stood at the port. I carried it home on the airplane. I carry it every morning when I wake up. And I will carry it until it heals, or until I die carrying it. Then he made 3 specific commitments. First, he would raise Lebanon's situation with every head of state he meets in the coming months. Not as an afterthought in a broader Middle East conversation. Not as a footnote. As a primary agenda item. I will not allow Lebanon to be buried under other crises, he said. It will be the first thing I mention, not the last. Second, he instructed Cardinal Parolin and the Secretariat of State, the Vatican's most experienced diplomats, to increase diplomatic pressure on all parties involved in the ceasefire negotiations. The Vatican maintains diplomatic relations with both Israel and Lebanon. It has informal channels to Iranian officials through interreligious dialogue. It has direct lines to the American, French, and British governments. Leo XIV ordered that every one of those channels be activated. Not for general expressions of concern, but for specific, concrete demands: Israeli withdrawal from Lebanese territory, enforcement of ceasefire provisions, and international support for Lebanese army deployment in the south. Third, he asked the Dicastery for the Eastern Churches, the Vatican office responsible for Catholic communities in the Middle East, to prepare a comprehensive report on Christian communities in Lebanon. Not statistics. Not bureaucratic assessment. A human report. One that would include personal testimonies, individual stories, photographs, the faces and voices of people living through what he called the slow martyrdom of abandonment. The word martyrdom was intentional. In Catholic tradition, martyrdom typically means bearing witness through suffering, often through death. But Leo XIV meant something different. He meant a martyrdom without persecutors. A martyrdom inflicted not by enemies of faith, but by the indifference of friends. A martyrdom of being forgotten. The Holy See is not a military superpower. It has no armies. No aircraft carriers. No capacity to impose economic sanctions. No ability to wage war. What it has is moral authority. The ability to speak. To convene. To embarrass. To bear witness. To pray. In conventional geopolitical calculations, moral authority is often dismissed as irrelevant. A nice sentiment that means nothing when tanks are rolling and missiles are falling. But in Lebanon, everything is shaped by religious identity. The Maronite Patriarch wields influence that no secular politician can match. The Pope's words carry weight that no UN resolution has ever carried. When the Pope stood on the Beirut waterfront, 150,000 people gathered. That was the largest public assembly in the country in 6 years. In a nation where nearly everything else has broken down, moral authority is not irrelevant. It is one of the few forces that still functions. A Lebanese diplomat based in Rome, a Maronite, educated in Beirut and Paris, who has represented Lebanon at the Holy See for 15 years, explained it this way. The international community has abandoned Lebanon. Everyone knows this. We know it. They know it. The United Nations passes resolutions that no one enforces. Resolution 1701, from 2006, was supposed to guarantee Hezbollah's disarmament and Lebanese sovereignty. It has been violated continuously for 20 years. The Americans broker ceasefires that no one respects, then move on to the next crisis. The Europeans send humanitarian aid that disappears into corruption that everyone acknowledges and no one has political will to reform. He paused. He looked out his window toward the Tiber River. The Pope cannot fix this, he continued. He does not have an army. He does not have economic leverage. He cannot impose sanctions or threaten military action. But he can do something no one else in the international system can do. He can make the world remember that Lebanon exists. He can stand at the crater of the port and force the cameras to point there. He can say, "I pray daily for Lebanon," and force diplomats to confront their own indifference. Moral authority is the only currency the Vatican has. Right now, for us, it is everything. It is the only thing keeping us from being completely forgotten. On May 20, 2 days after meeting with AramI, Pope Leo XIV held his weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square. 15,000 pilgrims and visitors filled the plaza. His catechesis that morning was about Pentecost, about the Holy Spirit descending on the apostles, about the gift of languages, about the birth of the Church as a community that communicates across every barrier of language, culture, and nationality. At the conclusion, he departed from his prepared text. He looked directly at the assembled crowd. "I ask you today to pray for Lebanon," he said. "Pray for its people. Pray for its children. Pray for the Christian communities who have inhabited that land since the time of the apostles and who are now being expelled from their homes by war, by poverty, by the indifference of the world. Lebanon is a message. Lebanon is a proof that Christians and Muslims can coexist. If we permit that message to be destroyed, if we turn away while that proof is erased, we will all be diminished. Pray for Lebanon and do not cease praying until the prayer is answered." The address was broadcast live to an estimated global audience of several million through Vatican Media's television, radio, and streaming platforms. Within hours, it had been translated and published by Catholic news organizations in 40 languages. Within 2 days, bishops in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and the Palestinian territories had referenced the Pope's words in their own homilies. The Maronite Patriarch issued a statement from Kirk. He thanked the Pope and described his continued attention to Lebanon as a lifeline in a time of drowning. A movement began. Subtle, but real. Prayers were added to masses. Church gatherings focused on Lebanon. Online communities organized awareness campaigns. What started as a pope's personal anguish became a collective invocation. The ceasefire holds. Barely. The negotiations continue. Slowly. The Christians of Lebanon pray. Desperately. The young architect with the visa application sitting on her desk has not yet submitted it. She told a friend that the Pope's visit 6 months ago is the reason. Every time I pick up the pen, she said, I hear his voice. Do not give up on this land. And I put the pen down. But she also said, I do not know how many more times I can put it down. That is the reality. The Pope's words offer something: spiritual encouragement, evidence of remembrance, proof that someone powerful sees their suffering. But words cannot rebuild an economy. Words cannot end occupation. Words cannot make a young architect find employment in her homeland. Yet they matter. Not because they solve the problem, but because they refuse to permit the problem to be forgotten. In the Apostolic Palace, every morning before dawn, before the Swiss guards change their shift, before the Curia offices open, before Rome stirs, the Pope of the Catholic Church opens his eyes. He kneels beside his bed in the small room where he sleeps alone. And he prays for a country 6,000 kilometers away. A country he cannot save. A country he cannot heal. A country he cannot protect from the forces tearing it apart. But a country he refuses, with every fiber of his being, with every prayer, with every word he speaks from every chapel and balcony and lectern, to forget. The situation in Lebanon is not resolved. It cannot be resolved quickly. The ceasefire extends 45 days beyond May 15th. That takes us to the end of June. What happens after that, no one knows. The Christians continue to emigrate. The economy continues to deteriorate. The military occupation continues. The negotiations continue with no optimism. But something has shifted. Spiritual attention has been directed toward a wounded nation. A pope who could speak about anything, who could focus on the entire world's suffering, has chosen to make Lebanon his particular cross. His particular prayer. His particular vigil. History has shown that spiritual movements can precede political change. That prayer can prepare the ground for action. That remembrance can create the conditions for justice. Whether that will happen here remains uncertain. But the attempt is being made. The Pope is making it. The Church is making it. And the Lebanese Christians who have not yet left are responding. The story of Lebanon is not concluded. It cannot be concluded. Because the people who live there have not surrendered. Even when every rational calculation tells them they should. The Maronite families who remain in their mountain villages. The Armenian communities who rebuilt after the port explosion. The Greek Orthodox parishes that open their doors every Sunday to congregations that shrink each year but refuse to close. The young architect who has not yet signed her visa application. They are all, in their own way, answering the Pope's plea. Not abandoning the land. Not yet. The next 45 days will determine whether Lebanon finds any path toward genuine peace, or descends into another cycle of violence that could extinguish some of the oldest Christian communities in the world. We will document every development. We will be here for every moment. Because Lebanon cannot afford for the world to look away. And the Pope will not permit it. Not under his watch. Not while he still draws breath. His prayer continues. And so must ours.